So our next speaker is Fernanda Santos from Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I'll mention also that Fernanda and I worked together a number of years ago when she was at UC Merced. And unfortunately, Anna, who is going to participate in this talk, who is at UC Merced, couldn't make it here today. So Fernanda will give her talk completely online. So Fernanda, go right ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, as Dave mentioned before, I was at UC Merced working as a postdoc of Asmuret, who gave a very nice talk and very good introduction for what I'm gonna start talking about. Yes, I have to say I had a great time at UC Merced. It was one of my happiest times. Still. But today I will talk about fire effects on organic matter in soil and stream water. And today I'm not going to be talking deeply about one particular study. What I wanted to talk about is give you a flavor of some of my work and what kind of insights I got by using NMR, in particularly liquid state NMR. So at now, broadly, I study the impact of disturbances on vegetation and soils. But mostly, I'm interested in how disturbances in general impact soil carbon cycling. So disturbance impacts vegetation, and this is easy to understand, right? So if you have a fire where you guys in California are used to, it's easy to think about fire removing vegetation from the surface. But this type of situation, this type of effects of fires also have cascading effects below ground that we don't address as much, at least in terms of ecosystem ecology. But going to the point of this slide, on the left side, there is an example, a good example of how fires can affect soils. So you see that fires expose roots systems and deposit ash, and it has tremendous effects on nutrients and as I mentioned, carbon and the physical structure of the soil in general. And also on the right, the figure below, there is another way to think about it. That graph represents thaw depth, and that's a soil from soils in the Arctic that's called permafrost. So think about popsicle melting. So these are the soils in the Arctic. They are melting due to climate change right now. And the way we can measure this melting process is by looking at the layer on the permafrost that starts to melt. And that's the thaw depth indices. And what I'm showing here on this figure in the light blue box plot, it's tundra. It's the thaw depth from tundra that was impacted by a fire. And the darker blue, it's from tundra. It's the opposite, I'm sorry. So the light blue is unburned, the tundra that had not been burned before, as far as we know, and the darker blue, it's the permafrost that has been impacted by fires. And what we see there is that the thaw depth of the permafrost impacted by fire, it's deeper than the thaw depth of the soils not impacted by fires. And that indicates that this fire and has exposed the tundra to different thermal conditions and hydrological conditions that is accelerating the thawing or the melting of the permafrost. Okay, so my work tries to understand how all those things then impacts the ability of soils to store carbon in the soil. And on the right, what I wanted to make the point here is that understanding how disturbance impacts soil carbon, it's not sometimes can be complicated because disturbances has a lot of nuances with them, right? So if you think about fires impacting soils, maybe that's an easy thing to understand. But there are other kinds of disturbance that are not as that are not discrete type of events that you can realize it's happening. For example, bark beetles attacking forests. That process happens very slowly, and the forests tend to die slowly. And so, how do you capture the impact of this slow death of trees on soils? Okay. Also, disturbance come in different severity. So, and this is depicting on the figure on the right. So this is showing forests being impacted by increasing disturbance severity levels. And my question is also like, as this severity levels increase, can we see that? Do we have enough tools to capture how those impacts above ground are impacting below ground processes? So this is something that I think a lot. And on top of that, when you think about disturbance, you have to think about the short term, the impact right after the disturbance, but also over the long term, right? You have to think about once I have a disturbance, the forest or the vegetation, the ecosystem in general is going to start regenerating, coming back or recovering, if you wish to use that word. So as the ecosystem recovers, pause disturbance, how the soil also behaves with that. So these are all the general things that I think of, and carbon is a very important part of that. So as I mentioned, I will be talking about three different case studies. One is about interactions of pyrogenic carbon, of fire-derived carbon, as Asmar mentioned before, in its interactions on soil minerals, and then post-fire effects on stream water chemistry, and the effects of heating temperatures on the chemical composition of soils. All trying to understand through different lenses how disturbances, but particularly fires, impact soil chemistry. So the first is case studies about pyrogenic carbon and its interactions with minerals. So Asmaret already gave you an excellent talk about pyrogenic carbon, so I'll skip that explanation. But it's important to understand how pyrogenic carbon interacts with soil and specifically mineral surfaces, so we can better understand how minerals can help mediate the transport of pyrogenic carbon from soils to rivers during dynamic hydrological flow regimes. So I think a lot about the movement of carbon, and in this case, pyrogenic carbon from the surface, from trees, or from the surface of the soil to deeper soil depths. And how minerals can help mediate the export of organic contaminants occurring with pyrogenic carbon. And I'm specifically thinking about maybe PAHs and different contaminants that are important and that co-occur, as I mentioned. And minerals also important in driving deep soil organic carbon storage. So knowing that or acknowledging that it is important to understand these interactions because there's the concentration of soil minerals tends to increase with depth. So understanding that interaction as pyrogenic carbon moves downwards, it's going to be important. And again, at lower soil depths, mineral surfaces protect pyrogenic carbon. And here I'm thinking more about the soluble, if I can say that, the soluble portion of pyrogenic carbon against microbial decay. So the idea here is that when pyrogenic carbon or the soluble or water extractable part of the pyrogenic carbon is in contact with the minerals, the minerals help to keep those materials in soils because it protects this soluble carbon against microbial decay while controlling the release of dissolved organic carbon into solution via sorption and desorption. So the influence of reactive soil minerals on dissolved organic carbon, the soluble fraction, tends to increase its depth. And begging the question of how fast this soluble fraction of pyrogenic carbon is sorbed by soil minerals and whether concentrations, which in the field would be influenced by soil moisture, affect the sorption kinetics of this material, the soluble fraction of pyrogenic carbon. And other questions that I have is what are the major classes of this material, of these compounds that are preferentially sorbed by the soil minerals? So when we think about minerals, so we think about kaolinite, for example, oxides. And when I talk about iron oxides for my experiment, I'll be specifically targeting hematite. But we can think about also other, there are plenty of different kinds of soil minerals, including manganese oxides. So the way we tested this, trying to understand sorption of the soluble compound of pyrogenic carbon on the minerals, we did a incubation experiment, more like a sorption incubation experiment, in which we extracted using water pyrogenic carbon that was formed at 300 degrees Celsius. And then we mixed this material with different pure minerals, quartz, hematite, kaolinite. But when we mix this material with these different minerals, this material also had different concentrations that we call low, medium, and high. Low, 5 ppm of carbon in the solution, 21 ppm of carbon, and 39 ppm in the carbon. So we had different treatments, let's put that way here. And then once we mix this soluble material, or once we mix the solution with the minerals, we mixed, right, these materials at different contact times, from 1 hour to 24 hours. Then we centrifuge, filtered, and supernatant what was in the solution, what we ran for liquid state or solution state, NMR. And this is an example of what we got, and I think Casmert also have shown that. So I was really excited to be exploring the solution part of my samples through NMR. And as Asmar mentioned before, with this technique, we were able to integrate different regions that we call lipids and amino acids, sugars, short amino acid chains, and the aromatics that could be from pyrogenic carbon itself, but also could be from lignin. So it's interesting, my experience with NMR, because I knew other chemists in the building, and I thought that was beautiful. They were all there knowing what they were looking for, and what they were looking for is one single peak in the spectrum, and they were just there to confirm, while I was there saying, okay, I acknowledge my samples are going to be messy, but this is what it is, right? So straight to the point, straight to the results. So what I wanted to show you here is what was in the solution out of the char without the minerals, right? What was the initial chemistry of this solution? And this is the results. So this is the NMR. The original charcoal material still retains a lot of compounds that was what remained from the pine wood, because the pyrolysis temperature that formed this material was considered mild at 300 degrees Celsius. So these carbohydrates that you see here, they are from the original material. So the original material of this charcoal was pine tree. So we see here that this initial solution was dominated by carbohydrates and lipids. So what I'm going to show you next is the same graph, but then how this distribution or relative proportion of assigned functional groups changed once this solution was in contact with the minerals. And, and this is the red bars when the solution was in contact with hematite for 24 hours, by the way. And the next graph in green shows what changed when this solution was in contact with kaolinite for 24 hours. So the presence of iron oxide preferentially sorbed simple lipids, and yes, that reminds me of the question about statistics that someone asked Asmrat. Yeah, we need to run those statistics to see if it's significantly significant. And in green, we show that kaolinite preferentially sorbed more complex lipids and proteins. So for aliphatics without the mineral, it was 26%, as you can see in the orange, and dropped to nearly 70% for iron oxide. So this indicates that it looks like the lipids are the compounds, or are the groups that were more affected by this by these interactions between the pyrogen carbon and with this chemistry and the minerals. We are still working on a paper on that. But I also wanted to show you, I know this is an abrupt end, but I will probably go back to this. Then we did another study that was in the field. That previous case study was in the lab, but we also go in the field and we collect stream water, because what I was looking for is the idea that, after burning, what's the composition, the chemical composition of stream water? And that was just an initial study to complement my broad career trajectory that I was thinking of the time, which is connect soils impact after burning on stream water chemistry. So this study was conducted at the Sierra Nevada in California and Yosemite National Park. This is the map. And for this study, we use stream water samples collected from streams affected by fire at different years. In other words, they were representing 1 year to 13 years after the last fire. But they were also either affected by low severity or very high severity fires. We asked the question of how time since fire and fire severity affect DOC, stream water DOC. For this study, we used stream water samples, and as I mentioned before, and the graph shows changes in stream water DOC in stream water, and this graph is stream water concentrations for sites sampled between 1 and 13 years after the last fire, and this includes sites affected by low severity fires and high severity fires. And the next graph shows the values from a mixed effect model. Overall, the trend suggests that in high severity fires, DOC or operationally defined DOC, it's when we take the stream water and filter them with a filter that has 0.7 microns mesh. And so the concentration of this DOC tends to decline for high severity fires with time since fire, whereas in low severity fires, DOC concentrations with time since fire tend to increase. This is because, I don't know if it is clear here, but the dashed line is for the low severity fire, and the solid line is for the high severity fire. And we think that there is a decline in DOC concentrations with high severity fires because it takes much longer for the ecosystem to recover after a very high severity fire. There's a lot of impact on a high severity fire, therefore high severity. But when you have very low severity, implying low impact, relatively speaking, compared to the high severity fire, then the ecosystem has what it needs to recover much faster. So you see that over time increase in carbon in stream water because the roots are growing, the leaves are falling, and the cycling of carbon is back to its original state. So, and you see that signal in the stream water as well uh, as a result. But for NMR, what I thought was interesting, that goes back to the lipids that I saw for my results. It's that regardless of low severity fire, regardless of the severity fire or regardless of time since fire, most of my samples or most of the DOM in stream water, dissolved organic matter in stream water, was dominated by lipids, particularly the simple lipids, the aliphatics. So we think that this is likely from microbial activities, microbe byproducts, uh, perhaps coming from deep soils, because these streams were collected during base flow when the water levels were pretty low during the summertime, to be more specifically. So I thought these results were really interesting, and I started thinking about whether these results would support the idea that, yeah, when it rains, when water comes out of the soil and goes to the streams, I think it's taking most of the microbial derived carbon. Um, and interestingly, I also started being puzzled by that. So all these studies have been in collaboration with ASMERT and others, by the way. And there's also a study in which we initiated. There was a fire in Colorado called Hayman Fire that happened in 2002. And 17 years later, we got stream water samples from these rivers. There are a lot of streams in this area. So we got samples from them, and I decided to run NMR to see, okay, 17 years after the fire, what do we see in terms of chemical composition for the stream water? Yes, guess what? We also see, regardless of the catchment, that the strongest resonance for proton NMR spectra across all streams was in the aliphatic region. And these samples were taken in May, July. I do believe we have more samples from other months, but this is what I began analyzing. And yeah, the aliphatics were dominating. So these are the insights that I've been getting from NMR, that a lot of these streams are dominated really by these aliphatic simple lipids. And now I'm wondering, is this real? Is that the story? Most of the stream water, it's mostly microbial derived. Um, or is this just for the summer, end of spring, beginning of summer? It happens that I take these samples, we take these samples in the summer, and that's what we get during base flow. Or is there something there that I'm not seeing? So this is super interesting. But of course, as scientists, when we get consistent results, we have right to question ourselves and see. Yeah, if you know any studies, recent studies showing those kind of NMR results for stream water, I would love to see what you are getting or what others are getting. Yeah, this is still also in progress. Um, don't worry, you're gonna get to interesting results regarding lipids again. Lipids are the best here. So soil heating. So we also have this question about what happens to how does the chemical composition of organic matter change with during fires, right? When you have heating of the soil, especially on the topsoil. But in this case, I was focusing on the soluble fraction of the soil organic matter. And in this case, I extracted the soluble component using water, as mentioned a little bit. So my question is, how does soil heating affect the chemical composition of dissolved organic matter? So I was interested in understanding the impact of heating treatments or heating temperature on the soluble fraction of soil carbon because it's more bioavailable to microorganisms. So microorganisms can easily access um, this soluble component as opposed to components that are not as soluble. And this component, the soluble compound, is more dynamic. It cycles faster. So will fire increase the availability of this soil carbon fraction? So that was my original question. And these are the sites where we got the samples, the soil samples, the western slopes of the Sierra Nevada. So we extracted these soils. We took the soils from the field, brought in the lab, and then we heat them in the oven at different temperatures, 150, 250, 350 degrees Celsius. Then we shake in water, we um, filter them, and process them so they were ready for NMR. But what interesting thing is that we also ran for total carbon for these soluble compounds, and we found that heating soils at 150 degrees Celsius, and particularly at 250, significantly increased the concentrations of organic carbon in water extractable organic matter across all soil types. And when soils were heated at 350 degrees Celsius, we observed a decline in DOC concentrations, suggesting that at this temperature, soil organic matter releases less soluble carbon compounds. And then here I will show the distribution of this, how the distribution of these groups changed with temperature across sites. And this is NMR, applied NMR. So at the y-axis at the bottom, you see the different sites. So each bar is for different sites, but here I will show just for the unburned samples, results for the unburned samples, and then I will increase the temperature as we move from the left to the right. So we see for the unburned that control soils were dominated by oxygenated structures, likely derived from plant litter, where soils heated at 150 degrees Celsius were dominated by both oxygenated and aliphatic structures, suggesting that the presence of both plant and microbial derived compounds. At 250, all sites lost oxygenated compound and became dominated by aliphatic structures, likely derived from microbial cells. And then at 300 degrees Celsius, all sites became more enriched in aromatic structures, a fraction that we talked about a lot, that includes pyrogenic carbon. So I think NMR has helped me a lot to understand why these changes were happening and where these compounds were likely coming from. So definitely in this controlled experiment, it showed me that if you heat the soils enough, you likely are affecting the cells of the microbes, and these lipids are from the microbial cells, which going back to all those studies, the previous studies, it makes me think that these aliphatics maybe are from, that I see in the stream water, are from microbial cells as well. So key points, iron oxides and kaolinite will preferentially absorb lipids, make them less bioavailable after fires and when in contact with these minerals. Higher concentration of dissolved pyrogenic carbon due to fires and change in soil moisture will increase its retention in soils. We saw that as we increase this retention of dissolved pyrogenic carbon on soil minerals is also affected by concentration of the carbon in the solution, and this is depicted in this figure here. Lipids dominate stream water carbon. I think I convinced you that based on NMR results. And surface soil heating changes the amounts and nature of water soluble carbon fraction. So indicates that at least immediately after the fires, lower temperature fires will increase the bioavailable carbon, whereas moderate temperature fires will you're going to have less bioavailable carbon, at least immediately after the fires. So these are the insights that I got from NMR. This is very exciting. I would love to continue this type of work in the future. And if you have any questions, I don't know if there's time for questions, but if not, you can always contact me by my email. Thank you so much. Appreciate your invitation for this meeting.
Thank you, Fernanda. So questions? Okay, well, thank you.